I think my worry, if that was me, would be suddenly you've got to get a bigger car. You?
We did, yeah. We swapped out of a, what was a little sort of hatchback, and then ended up with a people carrier, and even that's full now. You could fill a 7-seater people carrier up. You suddenly realise you've got a lot of family there.
Yeah.
But we're very, in my family there's hardly any children, through the aunts and uncles and everything. And the other sort of secondary relations, there's virtually no. It's a very, very small family. I think there were about 12 members, or something in the whole family. So we're doing our bit to keep it going.
Keep the Osborne line.
Yeah, keep the Osborne line going.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's more or less all I need in case there's anything.
Yeah. Well, I think I didn't quite tell you how I came about the English Democrats, did I? I didn't quite tell you how I came to them. I sort of stopped halfway through there. I think I looked around loads of other parties. I didn't actually Labour or Lib Dems. I sort of vaguely had an idea about the Lib Dems, but I'd been to see UKIP, and I still know Nigel Farage, sort of reasonably well, and I thought he's fantastic at what he's doing. I know he's having to make a big grandstand of everything, but he's doing a great job in exposing what's going on out there. And of course, yeah, well, he has. He's got a lot of chance of unseating John Bercow, which would be great, the Speaker, to do that, because it's a vote against, the three main parties, as I see it. If you're voting UKIP, we're saying none of the above, which I'm very big in favour of that, and I've done a lot of work with that organisation in America as well. Basically they've actually got that into the state legislature in Massachusetts. It was a guy called William White, and it's on. You can have none of the above on any Massachusetts ballot, which means basically you can vote. If none of the above wins, you vote out all of those candidates. They can't re-stand in a new election, so that's called a binding none of the above for a new election. So it throws people out, and people say, well, you can't have this, but it's more like, you get a primary, a secondary, and a sort of a tertiary sort of election like they do in America, but this time you're throwing candidates out. So it makes them very careful about who they put up, and they better be listening to the electorate, because at the moment you vote for a party and they go off and do what the hell they want. They don't go and do what anybody says. It should be more of a contract with that party, and if they're not doing it, you throw them out after 2 years. Vote them out again. I think it's the essential thing, because so many ballot papers are spoiled, so many people put a big cross against it, and it's not registered as a vote against the system. And to be elected on a 40-50% turnout, it's just shocking. If our party couldn't bring a high turnout and couldn't get a very high proportion of that, in no way would I think we had a mandate to do virtually anything. And for that reason, there's several little ideas what I've had where we should actually say on your self-assessment form, you should have a graded system whereby the form, you look at it and you think, okay, well, defence, well, I want 2% of the 100% of that portion of my tax that would go to it to go to that cause. I might say welfare, I might want 20%. I might want other things to go to health and these various departments, while we don't have control over those budgets. So you actually give the government a fixed amount to spend on each area, and you say that on your tax return, how you want your money spent, because otherwise, basically you don't own the fruits of your labour. You've got no representation whatsoever, and it's an extreme view, if you want to call us an extremist. The only thing I'm pretty extreme on, I'd abolish income tax, absolutely, because right at the bottom of the scale, people are getting taxed 20 quid a week, 30 quid a week. They need that money, with these tax credits. And if that isn't the biggest admission that you're overtaxing people, and ultimately the people at the bottom pay way more tax than people at the top. If you think about it, most of the people at the top can get around most of those tax laws. And I think Robert Peston in his book Who Runs Britain said, like, of the top 100, or several hundred millionaires and billionaires pay virtually no tax at all. And some of them were paying 5%. You can arrange your affairs to do that. So it's people at the top don't pay. People at the bottom, obviously, on benefits don't pay any tax. It's the mugs in the middle who pay, who are people who might be, out there doing cleaning jobs and, very, valuable work that they're doing, or people running their own little business right the way up. So it's small, people like that, and medium-sized, up to medium-sized companies that work. Those big businesses, they can't exist without being crony corporatists. They're in bed with the government. All the competition is regulated out. So they put these huge amounts of regulation so they can do all the compliance. It costs you a fortune to do it if you're a small company, so you can't actually get any bigger. Those big companies, a big company is not efficient at all. It's a myth, an absolute myth. You're either a cartel, a bunch of crooks, or you're crony corporatists. And we've just seen that what banks are. They're crony corporatists. You know, they fail. They fail with you know, monotonous regularity. There were 20 recessions in the 20th century, and most of them people didn't know happened because banks were bailed out on the quiet. But you know, these days they had to do it up front.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when those banks should have gone and sensible banks taken over. You know, what's been missed in the banking crisis was all the efficient, sensible, responsible banks could have had a chance to take over those irresponsible, overstretched banks, take up their assets. Probably lots of people wouldn't have been put out of work, but now we're just going to have a huge slump, a huge amount of debt which we can't pay off. They're either going to inflate their way out of it by printing loads of money, which is going to rob every person who's saved and been prudent of their income, or they're just going to, you know, renege on the debt. You know, so what are their options? And you've just got these zombie banks out there like RBS. They can't do anything. They're just up to the necks in debts, and they haven't got any money. Yeah, the money they have got, they've hoarded, and then they've multiplied it up by the fractional reserve banking system. You know, they multiply it by 9. Are you familiar with how the fractional reserve banking system works? If you put £1,000 into a bank, they hold that as a deposit. They've got to keep that. They're not allowed to spend that money, but they can multiply it by 9 and loan that out to people. So that 1,000 becomes 10,000, but they can loan 9,000 of it. Some of that money will end up in other banks. That loan money, which actually is fake money, it's commercial bank money, and they'll multiply it up by 9. Yeah, they're writing it down as an asset, multiplying it up again, and if it goes through the entire banking system, it can end up being £100,000 in loan money. It's crazy, isn't it? It's mad, and of course it's massive amounts of debts that's magicked out of thin air. You know, which is the thing most people don't realise. Most of the debt in the world doesn't exist. It's actually all money multiplied up out of thin air. It doesn't exist. So if it doesn't exist, and the taxpayers theoretically don't owe it because we loaned it to the banks, why not just cancel it? Let's all start again. You know, if they're going to do this, if they're going to have the government and the taxpayer as a lender of last resort, why not just start again? But the banking system, I mean, they should go back down to a less of a multiplier, like 5 times or something, or 3 times. Or some people even say the bank should have 100% guarantee. So if they want to loan out, £10 million, they've got to have £10 million on deposit to do it. And that way they'll be very cautious. You'll be keeping an eye on the bank because your money is in there. You'll be going to every one of their creditor meetings or every one of their shareholders meetings to make sure they are not doing any dodgy deals, behind the scenes, or being shored up by the Federal Reserve in America, or the Bank of England or some other central bank. And there's even a piece on my site, I met President Saakashvili of Georgia about 3 weeks ago now, and his country was one of the most corrupt in the world, and they had fought this war with Russia. I think it was North Ossetia, South Ossetia. They still control part of that country, and it went from being the most corrupt country to having zero corruption. And he fired all the police force because they would just be waiting on the streets for people to, driving past, to get bribes off them to let them go. And all the bureaucrats, 200,000 bureaucrats he got rid of. There was like 4 months of protests. He couldn't use his presidential office or anything. And he said after that they got very sick of it. And the government is now limited to 30% of the GDP. I mean, if you think of our government, it's nearly 50% of GDP that they're actually spending. So it's 30%, they're limited by law, but that figure should be more like 20%. And just let the government do the things it can do, which are defence, the police force, policing the streets, and managing the legal system and enforcing contracts. Everything else is, it's been proven time and time again, is far better off in the sector, the private sector. I hate to use that term because everyone thinks of big capitalists. Well, we haven't had capitalism in this country since the 1900s, the late 19th century. That was the last time I could work out there was any capitalism. That's where people work and save, and then they put that money in a bank or a building society. This was a building society, a very small one, the Burnley Building Society, this building. And then they go and build local houses with it for local people, and it's now got into the hands of these huge corporations. It's like, crony corporatism doing all the damage, and governments doing all the damage, and capitalism, which hasn't existed for 100 and odd years, getting all the blame. I still think, the analogy is that I'm sure the government still thinks that there's ham in a hamburger. It's beef doing all the work, ham getting all the credit.